Chapter 1. The Tollbooth at the Edge of the World. April 2026. Somewhere in the Persian Gulf right now, a tanker captain is on the phone with his insurance broker. The broker is saying no. The captain, a guy named either Dmitri or Henrik, I genuinely don't know, but it's always one of those. He's been anchored for 9 days. 9 days! The cargo in his hold is worth about $40 million, and it's going nowhere. Because the road is locked. 21% of the world's oil moves through a stretch of water that's 21 miles wide at its tightest point. The Strait of Hormuz. Hormuz, the way Iranians actually say it. And as of right now, Iran controls it. Not with mines, not with carrier groups, with software. They call it, well, Washington calls it, the Tehran Tollbooth. Crypto-based transit fees, a tracking platform, a registry. Ships that pay, pass. Ships that don't. And in 3 documented cases this year, ships that didn't pay just kind of vanished from tracking records for 48 hours, while something happened aboard that nobody involved is willing to describe out loud. Every day this holds, the global economy loses roughly $4 billion. $4 billion. That's not a think tank estimate. That's a shipping industry number, and those people are almost pathologically conservative about projections. Here's the thing, though, and this is why I'm making this video today, because I don't think mainstream coverage is anywhere close to the actual story. There is a tool, not a weapon exactly, more like, okay, I'll get to what it actually is, that some of the most serious strategic thinkers in Washington believe could break this thing open. Quietly, without a shot fired. It's an AI system called Claude Mythos, and 40 organizations on Earth have access to it right now. 40. Not because it's unfinished, because it's dangerous enough that the people who built it decided that's the number. Everyone else covering the Hormuz situation is arguing about Trump's ultimatums, about oil prices, about whether a military strike is coming. Those are the leaves. I want to show you the forest, what this actually is, how it works, and what it might mean for the next 20 years of American power. Stay with me, please, because in the next 15 minutes, you're going to understand something that most people watching the news right now are completely missing. Chapter 2. The Tehran Tollbooth. Let me show you the actual structure of what Iran built, because it matters, and because it's not what you'd expect. The strait itself. 2 miles of navigable water in each direction. That's the shipping lane. The rest is shoal water, Iranian territorial claims, and about 3,000 years of history that none of the countries currently arguing over it were around to witness. In the 1980s, the tanker war, during the Iran-Iraq conflict, the blockade was physical. Mines, missiles, U.S. Navy frigates taking hits, sailors dying. The world eventually negotiated its way through it, took years, cost lives. But it was a problem you could, in theory, bomb your way out of. What Iran built this time is harder. Much harder. Every vessel approaching the strait broadcasts automatic identification signals. AIS, it's called, basically a GPS ping that every ship sends constantly. Iran's system intercepts those pings, cross-references them against a registry of approved vessels, meaning vessels whose owners have paid the transit fee. Flags anything that hasn't. The fee right now sits at around $300,000 per vessel, per transit. The Strait moved in normal times, roughly 2,000 ships a month. Here's what makes it almost impossible to counter through traditional means. The software lives across multiple servers, some hardened, some deliberately obscure, hosted through third-party infrastructure in countries that are not picking up a U.S. legal request anytime soon. It's semi-automated, which means you can't just negotiate with the operators in real time. The rules are set. The enforcement runs. You can't unplug it without hitting civilian infrastructure. You can't bomb a server farm. Well, you can, but the collateral consequences would make the Strait problem look small. And the payment system runs on crypto rails, which means there's no central bank to call. It's an elegant trap, honestly. I hate saying that, but it is. And this is exactly the problem that a system like Claude Mythos was built, accidentally in some ways, to solve. Chapter 3. The Qualitative Jump. Okay, I want to be careful here, because this is exactly where most coverage goes completely sideways. People hear powerful AI, and their brain fills in one of two pictures. Either HAL 9000 quietly unplugging Dave's oxygen, or a really fast search engine. Mythos is neither. And I think the only honest way to explain what it actually is to start with what it isn't. GPT-4, GPT-5, the earlier Claude models, Gemini, all of them, at their core, are pattern matchers. Extraordinarily sophisticated ones, sure. You feed them enough examples of something, they learn to reproduce the shape of it. Brilliant for writing, for summarizing, for answering questions that look like questions already baked into their training data somewhere. But there's a ceiling. Ask any of those models to reason about a truly novel system, something engineered specifically to be opaque, something no dataset ever captured, and they start guessing. Confidently, fluently, totally wrong in ways that take a human expert to even catch. Mythos doesn't guess, or at least that's the claim. And what I find compelling is they've actually demonstrated it. So let me give you 3 concrete things it's done, because one example isn't enough to make this real. First, OpenBSD. In 2025, during a controlled audit, Mythos was handed the full source code of OpenBSD, the operating system running inside routers, servers, firewalls, critical infrastructure all over the world, and given one instruction: find problems. That's it. No list of known vulnerabilities, no hints. Just look at this thing and tell us what's wrong. It found a flaw that had been sitting in that codebase for 27 years. 27. Multiple professional security teams, thousands of person-hours of manual review, millions of lines. Nobody caught it. Mythos caught it in under 4 hours. Not by searching a vulnerability database, by reading the logic of the system, finding where a design assumption from 1998 created a door and walking through it mentally before any real attacker could. Second example, and this one matters more directly for what we're talking about. Mythos was run against a set of industrial control systems, the kind that run power grids, water treatment facilities, port logistics. It was asked one question: How would an attacker with zero prior knowledge of this specific system cause maximum disruption? It generated attack sequences the system's own designers had never thought of. Not from a database, not from known playbooks, from first principles. Reasoning about how the system worked, where the logic had gaps, and what a patient, smart adversary would do with those gaps. Third, a red team exercise. Simulated, controlled, properly authorized, I want to be clear about that, against a major bank's transaction verification system. Existing security tools had flagged the system as low risk. Mythos identified 17 distinct pathways through it. 3 of those turned out to be genuinely exploitable when human experts went back and checked. The other 14 were theoretical, real, but probably not practical. What Mythos can do, and this is where the reasoning capability stops being abstract, is run thousands of those scenarios at the same time. Not sequentially, simultaneously. What happens to Iran's revenues if the toll rate goes up another 50,000 per vessel? At what point does that start hurting Iranian procurement enough that the calculation shifts? When do Japanese insurers start pushing Tokyo toward a harder position? What's the specific price modeled against actual transaction data at which maintaining this blockade costs Iran more than ending it? Not estimates, not a think tank's best guess. Modeled figures derived from the actual payment flows, because the Tehran Tollbooth runs on blockchain rails, and blockchain is opaque, but it isn't invisible. Every transaction leaves a trace. Mythos can follow those traces, identify the wallets, find the exchanges where crypto gets converted to something Iran can actually spend, and this is the part that matters for a negotiator. Identify which specific Iranian institutions depend on that revenue. Not the Revolutionary Guard in general, the specific procurement offices, the import accounts, the ministry budget lines that disappear if this revenue stream dries up. That's what you walk into a room with. Not, we know you need the money. That's too vague. You walk in with, we know Procurement Office X is running a 12% budget shortfall because of the currency routing changes in February, and we know the 3 institutions most exposed if the exchange rate moves another 2 points. That conversation, that specific, documented, here's exactly where it hurts conversation, is completely different from anything a traditional negotiating team can have. And you don't get there by guessing. You get there by having a system that can reason through the whole thing faster than the other side can change it. So, why haven't we already talked about this in past tense? What's the holdup? Project Glasswing. And honestly, this part surprised me when I dug into it. Chapter 4. Project Glasswing. Glasswing is the access framework that governs how Mythos gets used. Anthropic named it after the glasswing butterfly, the one with wings that are almost completely transparent so you can see right through them. Full visibility. That's the concept. Here's the structure. 40 organizations have access. AWS, Google, Cisco, Palo Alto Networks, the Linux Foundation, and some that haven't been publicly named. Every significant operation requires a human confirmation before it runs. The whole system sits under oversight from the U.S. Department of Commerce and CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Wait, I should be precise about that. CISA isn't running operations. They're more like auditors. They have visibility into logs, they can flag concerns, they can pull access in extreme cases. but they're not in the seat for individual decisions. The point is, this is not a tool you point at a target and say, "Go." There are layers, deliberate structural layers. And honestly, given what this thing can do, that's probably the right call. Some critics, and I want to give this argument its full weight because it deserves it, argue that Glasswing is essentially a liability shield. That a motivated government could find ways to use Mythos offensively while the oversight structure gives them cover. That paper frameworks and real-world national security operations have a complicated relationship, to put it politely. That concern is legitimate. I'm not waving it away. But here's what I find more convincing when I sit with it. Glasswing wasn't designed by lawyers. It was designed by Anthropic's own engineers, the people who built Mythos, who watched what it could do in testing and then decided on their own, we need a fence. Not because someone told them to, because they looked at what they'd made and felt the weight of it. The 27-year OpenBSD vulnerability wasn't found because someone told Mythos to find vulnerabilities in OpenBSD. It was found because Mythos was asked to audit the system. That's it. That's the whole prompt. And the capability that fell out of that is serious enough that the people closest to it chose restraint. That matters. It doesn't resolve the concern, but it matters. I want you to hold two things at the same time, because they're both true and they're both uncomfortable. 1. The most capable reasoning system ever built is right now being pointed at the problem that's strangling 21% of global energy. 2. The people controlling it are deliberately, explicitly choosing not to use it as a weapon. Whether that restraint holds, whether it can hold under real pressure with real stakes, is the actual question underneath all of this. Not, can Mythos crack the Tehran Tollbooth? The answer to that is probably yes. The real question is what kind of world we're building if it does. Chapter 5. What it's actually doing right now. So let's get concrete. Not hypotheticals. What is Mythos actually doing? Cisco and Palo Alto are using it right now to harden the digital infrastructure of global shipping. The AIS transponder networks, port management systems, insurance platforms that ship owners need just to get coverage on a voyage. Every one of those systems has been under attack. Iranian state hackers, North Korean groups, independent ransomware operators who figured out that one seized cargo ship pays better than 6 months of hospital system attacks. Mythos finds the doors before the attackers do. Closes them. That's defensive, within Glasswing's scope. And it's already changing the risk math for some operators who'd written off the strait entirely. The second thing, the economic modeling work, is happening too, though more quietly. Mapping the bilateral payment flows, finding the leverage points in Iran's own financial dependencies. This is the kind of analysis that a good negotiating team needs before they sit down across a table. And right now, someone is using it. The third effect is the hardest to explain and, I'd argue, the one that actually moves first. Before any negotiation, before any hack, before anything dramatic. Confidence. Or the absence of it, which is the real problem. Let me walk you through how marine insurance works, because it's actually the key to this whole thing, and nobody talks about it. Lloyd's of London, and the other big marine insurers, They publish something called a listed areas notice. When a body of water gets listed as a war risk zone, every ship transiting it pays a surcharge, on top of the standard coverage, on top of everything else. Right now, the Hormuz surcharge sits somewhere between 0.5 and 1% of the vessel's insured value per voyage. Doesn't sound like much until you do the math. A VLCC, a very large crude carrier, the big ones, the ones that actually move the volume that matters, is insured for roughly $130 million. 1% of $130 million is $1.3 million. Per trip. One voyage. That's before fuel, before crew costs, before port fees, before anything. Smaller operators, mid-sized tankers, thinner margins, they just don't go. The math doesn't work. So the ships that are still running the strait are the ones with contracts large enough to absorb it, mostly Chinese and Russian-flagged vessels operating under different insurance structures. The market sorted itself. And the sorted version looks almost exactly like what Iran wanted. Now, here's the specific mechanism by which Mythos changes that. And I want to be specific because "it reduces the attack surface" is one of those phrases that sounds meaningful and explains nothing. So let me actually explain it. The war risk surcharge exists because insurers are pricing three separate things. 1. Physical attack risk. Missiles, mines, seizure, the stuff that ends up on the news. 2. Digital interference. Spoofed AIS signals routing a ship into Iranian territorial waters by mistake, or not by mistake. Ransomware hitting navigation or cargo systems mid-transit. Falsified port clearances that get a vessel flagged as non-compliant before it even enters the strait. 3. Regulatory trap. Iran's maritime courts are a real institution. They've been used. A vessel flagged in Tehran's system as non-compliant can face legal action that takes months and costs more than just paying the toll would have. Mythos doesn't touch the first risk. Physical attack is still physical attack. But the second and third? That's exactly where it works. On the digital side, and this is already happening, not theoretical, Cisco and Palo Alto are using Mythos to audit the specific systems Iranian state hackers have been going after. The AIS transponder firmware, the ECDIS navigation software, that's the electronic chart system, the thing that tells the ship where it is. Cargo management platforms that were last updated in 2019 and have been carrying documented vulnerabilities ever since, just quietly, because updating them requires dry dock time nobody wanted to schedule. Mythos finds those vulnerabilities before the attackers do. Same process as the OpenBSD audit. Same reasoning from first principles approach. Patches go in, the door closes. For vessels enrolled in the Glasswing Partner Network, that's already done. On the regulatory trap side, this one's more interesting to me, honestly. Mythos can model, in advance, how Iran's vessel classification system works. Feed it a ship's registration details, its ownership chain, its last 12 months of port calls, its cargo manifest history, and it can tell you, before that ship gets anywhere near the strait, whether Tehran's system is going to flag it, why it would flag it, and what specific changes to the documentation chain would move it off the list. That's not hacking Iran's system. That's understanding it well enough to stay outside its targeting criteria entirely. When Lloyd's analysts see that enrolled vessels are running fully audited, patched systems and have been pre-cleared against known flag triggers, the surcharge model changes. Not to zero, but from 1.3 million a voyage to something a mid-size operator can actually run profitably. Ships start moving, not because anyone fired anything, not because Iran backed down publicly, which they won't, they can't politically afford to, because the economics of the route quietly shifted back to viable for enough operators that the blockade starts leaking. And a blockade that leaks is losing. Chapter 6. The Forest. Sun Tzu wrote that the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. He wrote that 2,500 years ago in a world of chariots and bronze swords. And here we are in 2026, watching it play out in a 21-mile stretch of water between Iran and Oman, with a butterfly's name and a reasoning system nobody fully understands yet. I don't know if this works. I want to be honest about that. The situation is moving, the constraints are real, and history has a way of humbling people who say, "This time it's different." Maybe it isn't. But what I do believe, and this is the thing I keep coming back to, is that the countries learning to use tools like this, carefully, with enough restraint to keep the international architecture from collapsing around them, those countries are building something that outlasts any single crisis. The capacity to project power without paying the price of destruction. The most expensive thing a superpower can do is fight a war it could have won without one. That's not an idealistic statement. It's the coldest calculation in geopolitics. Look, I want to ask you something directly before we're done. There are a lot of channels out there right now, a lot of voices. And honestly, a lot of them are not rooting for America. Some of them are loud. Some of them are well-funded. Some of them are very, very good at making the United States look like the villain in every story they tell. I'm one channel, one voice. I do this because I believe someone has to show the forest when everyone else is arguing about leaves. And because I believe, genuinely, that American strength and American restraint used together are still the best thing going in a world that has a lot of uglier options. If you believe that too, please subscribe. That's it. That's all I'm asking. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to a small channel trying to cut through the noise. Every subscriber is one more person who sees this kind of analysis instead of the version that starts with America being wrong. Thank you, sincerely. Thank you for watching. Thank you for thinking. And thank you for caring enough about this country to spend 12 minutes on a story most people haven't heard yet. And if you want the history underneath all of this, Carg Island, the terminal that made the modern oil economy possible, and why it matters to everything we just talked about, that documentary is already on this channel. The end card will take you there. God bless America.